Hello and good evening. I'm Dustin Olson, and this is the Polling Club podcast, taking the American pulse. And I'm going to be talking about the recent news and polling over the last week or so. Go to some recent uh, TV appearances that I've had, and talk about some of the important things that are happening in our country. Which, as of just moments ago, Kevin McCarthy said that he will not be seeking to run for speaker again, and we'll leave that up to House Republicans to come up with another option, and who knows what that's going to be. And it's really quite remarkable. We're going to go back to last week, Monday, here during the program, and look at the recent Washington Post ABC poll and some of the damning data that's out there about the economy, inflation, and public opinion for President Biden. And Democrats are just loving what's happened in the last week and a half, and they've been really working very hard to change the subject, and it appears that they've been successful to some extent. With that, if you'd like to join the conversation wherever you're watching this, we're being live streamed across multiple platforms. Feel free to post a comment or a question, and I can incorporate that into the program. And then additionally, if you'd like to be part of the Polling Club, go to pollingclub.com. You can sign up there. You'll be able to get free polling, as well as be able to help decide what topics we are going to dive into. And of course, we're going to be wanting to find out more about what the American people and also Republican primary voters think about what's happened within the Republican Congress in the last hours. So we'll be finding out what people think about that. But do check that out. And of course, if you're looking to do survey research of your own, a poll or market research, maybe you have a company and you'd like to know what your market thinks about something, you'd like to test new products, whatever it is. We do all sorts of different research for all sorts of different companies, and also we do research for people across the political spectrum. So go to americanpulse.us. But first, I did a quick flash poll. It's not scientific at all, on Twitter, now called X. And I was definitely the Matt Gaetz people are out there retweeting it, and I said, "Who do you stand with, Kevin McCarthy or Matt Gaetz?" And it pretty quickly got about 900 people voting on that, and 92% said Matt Gaetz, 8% Kevin McCarthy. So at least in the digital sphere, that's where some folks were, but. Anyway, we'll see. I will say that I thought that Kevin McCarthy has handled things very well. In one of the first interviews, which we'll go to here in a moment, I referred to him as being unflappable. And I think that in this speakership, which didn't last very long, that is one word that I would use to describe him. He went through 15 rounds of votes, and he was unflappable. He got the best of Biden in May with the beginning of all the spending conflict, and ultimately got a more conservative version for the budget going forward. And then, of course, last week was able to, which is pretty amazing, 70% of the budget was actually passed through appropriation bills, single issue appropriation bills, 70% of government spending, which does not happen very often. And of course, for 8 people, that was not enough, and they decided to burn the house down. So we will see what happens here. But one thing I did notice is that the world did not tilt off its axis. So I think the sun will come up tomorrow and everybody will be okay. But we will be out there to find out what happens and what people think about it. But first, I'd like to go to last Monday. It's amazing. It's only been 8 or 9 days ago. I had the opportunity to join the local Fox 5 DC, as part of their Monday morning quarterbacks to talk about what was then the upcoming debate, and to talk about the possible shutdown that the media was gearing up for all week and really trying to create this conflict, and was able to do that with Jeanette Reyes, who's one of the anchors there, very talented person and very talented newswoman, as well as my Democratic colleague on the other side, Crystal Knight, who also had some interesting things to say. But we'll see what we had to say, and we'll come back and I'll give you my thoughts on what was happening a week ago. In particular, that was a big news day. A lot of news came out about the economy, as well as the Washington Post ABC poll that showed Joe Biden down 10 points against Donald Trump. All sorts of crazy stuff happening, and it's hard to imagine only 8 days ago.
It is time now for our Monday morning quarterbacks. Members of the House are back today after heading home over the weekend while a government shutdown looms. Plus, another chance to see the Republican presidential candidates go head-to-head at this week's debate. Joining us this morning are guests Crystal Knight and Dustin Olson. Good morning to both of you. Thanks for joining me.
Good morning.
All right, so yet again, we're talking about another possible government shutdown. It's kind of a shame that this has become what feels like a recurring thing every few years. Dustin, I want to start with you here. It's interesting, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, the position that he's in, it's really a test of his leadership. What do you make of his situation, I guess?
Well, there's nothing like a deadline, and I would expect that this week we're going to see a lot of action happening, and there's nothing like a deadline to get Congress moving. I would say that I'm impressed by McCarthy through the year, from how he started out as Speaker, going through so many rounds of votes, then having the spending victory back in May with the president. And the one thing I'd say about him is that he's unflappable, and I would expect that would continue through this week, and that ultimately things will get worked out.
Crystal, I'll ask you the same question, but specifically, do you think a lot of folks are using the word impressed with Kevin McCarthy these days?
I think so. Absolutely. I tend to think that Kevin McCarthy has weathered many storms in not only becoming the Speaker of the House, but also trying to really wrangle his caucus. I am expecting a government shutdown to happen just based upon these stalwarts or these holdouts, people who are really trying to push him on this economic agenda that many Republicans just aren't satisfied with under this Democratic administration. And so while I think he has shown leadership, clearly, not only fighting against the other side, but within his own party, I do expect this week to really be a showdown and a true testament to what his strength will be moving into 2024.
Yeah, I think it'll be really telling. I'll ask you both, Dustin, I'll go back to you just on it from a broader perspective. The American people, it's really them that are ultimately most affected, regardless of their political backgrounds. What do you think voters make of this?
Yeah, as a pollster, we ask these questions, and we'll be going in the field with a new survey this week asking this question exactly. And I would say that there's a couple of things. First off, most people are concerned about the economy. That is the biggest concern for Republicans and Democrats. So people are concerned about what a shutdown would have an effect on the economy. Secondly, people are tired of the process in Washington as far as how we do these continuing resolutions, these big bloated omnibus bills. So the idea that we have the appropriations process partly working now, I think people like. However, they're not going to be too fond of shutting down the government.
Crystal, I'll ask you this question from a different angle. Is there a way that Democrats can kind of spin this to a more positive narrative for them?
Well, I think the spin will be, if the shutdown happens, it happens under the leadership of the Republicans, and it happens on the hands of Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And so that's the spin. That's the positive thing. While many people, no matter, again, as the other person just stated, no matter what your political affiliation is, you're feeling the woes of this economy at the pump, in the grocery store. But if a government shutdown happens, this is on the hands of Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And that's what Democrats have to tell. And that's what this administration has to tell, again, moving into 2024, thinking about how voters are thinking about the economy at large.
All right, switching gears here to our second half. Crystal, I'll stay with you. The Republican debate happening this week. I'll ask you this. Who do you think has the most to gain and who has the most to lose?
Wow, great question. I think the person that has the most to lose is Ron DeSantis. I think he's climbing back up, but I don't think that he had a great performance in the first debate. I think the person that has the most to gain is Nikki Haley. She had a outstanding performance. She was one of the standouts in the first Republican debate. And so I anticipate her attacks to be stronger and deeper, and for her to share more about her foreign policy experience, which really, that's one of the things that she stands out amongst the crowd beyond Mike Pence. But I do expect Nikki Haley to be the top performer this week.
Yeah, we did see polling showed that voters were quite pleased with her performance in the last debate. I want to ask you this, Dustin, actually. Former President Donald Trump will not be attending. Instead, he'll go visit with the auto workers who are striking. Do you think, I mean, he is by far and away the number one candidate in terms of polling. How do you think this will play when it comes to him?
Well, first, I'd say that what Crystal said was exactly right, that Nikki Haley has the most to gain and Ron DeSantis has to prove himself. As far as Donald Trump goes, I would say that his counter-programming is actually really smart. I also would predict that while our polling shows that most Republicans would like to see him debate, I think probably because they think it'd be more interesting, that actually by him not being there at the first debate and not being there at the second debate, my prediction would be that there'll be fewer viewers for this debate, and it really probably won't make a big difference.
All right, we'll have to see. Certainly the first one was quite interesting, got pretty fiery, so we'll see how this one shakes out. All right, Crystal Knight, Dustin Olson, thanks for joining us this morning. Have a good week.
Thank you. You too.
All right, 7:35.
So there we have it. I'm curious what you thought, maybe what the debate was like. You'll get to hear my thoughts here in a little bit. We did, myself, Crystal, and Jeanette talked about it Thursday morning after the debate. It's amazing that's been less than a week ago. It's hard to believe that, but interested to see what you thought, how you thought the debate went, and get your input on that as well. And I got a couple of comments while we were watching the video there about I'm wearing a tie today. I was on Israeli nightly news earlier talking about all the stuff going on in our politics right now, and which is similar to the Knesset, which has coalition governments and all sorts of infighting and everything, and it looks a lot like how our Congress looked today. A couple of things I want to mention is I'm about to go to Fox News and Trace Gallagher, who had me on last Monday night to talk about polling, the Washington Post poll that showed Biden down 10 points. But ultimately, what was really stark on that poll, as well as a recent Fox News poll, Wall Street Journal poll, a NewsNation poll, it really all sorts of polls, which you'll get to hear me talk about. There's really a coalescing of public opinion around the cost of things and the economy, and disapproval of the handling of that by those in power, which is very much showing up in the polling. Our American Pulse surveys, as well as surveys done by other people. But something I wanted to mention, that's how the week started. You saw this incessant media push about the fights and about the shutdown. The shutdown was going to happen, and just people believe that was going to happen. Obviously, we averted it. My take is that the Democrats were desperate for it because it was a way to shift attention away from what ultimately is the most important thing to most people, which is the economy and being able to provide for their family and how expensive things are. But there's just a few things that I think that they're trying to shift focus away from. The other topics that are out there right now, the economy, the issue of age and competency, the alleged influence peddling. By the way, that was a headline today that people probably missed. Hunter Biden in court, and he pled not guilty. And then just overall high voter disapproval numbers, and the race getting competitive, or Donald Trump effectively having a decent lead. So some of the things that are going on out there additionally, but we'll talk about that here with Trace Gallagher on Fox News.
Let's bring in Kaylee McGee-White, editor of Restoring America at the Washington Examiner, and Dustin Olson, pollster at American Polls. Thank you both for coming on. We talk a lot. In fact, the whole country is talking a lot about this Washington Post poll, Kaylee, the whole concept of, the former president being 10 points ahead of President Biden. But I thought that this was more interesting. This is the economy poll, which I think is more damaging. It says Biden and the economy, 74% say the state of the nation's economy is not good, poor. 75% say incomes of average Americans not good, poor. 91% disapprove of gas prices. 87% disapprove of food and energy prices. Kaylee, if you're the Biden administration, that's a bad sign.
It's a very bad sign, especially for a president who is making Bidenomics the main part of his re-election pitch. This is not a good sign. Another really notable finding in that Washington Post poll, Trace, was Biden's decrease in support among young voters. Trump was up above Biden by 20 points among voters under the age of 35. That's my generation, Gen Z and millennials. And that's significant because 2/3 of Gen Z voters and millennials turned out for Biden in 2020. And now just 4% say they have a favorable view of the president. That's a significant drop. And if Trump could make up a lot of ground in a hypothetical general, he could very easily win the election.
Yeah, the key phrase there is a significant drop, Dustin. Of course, Karine Jean-Pierre at the White House is saying, polls. Who listens? Who watches polls? Watch.
Polls are polls, right? They are going to be all over the place. They don't tell the whole story, actually. And that is just the way a poll is.
They don't tell the whole story, Dustin, but these polls tell a very compelling story.
Well, as a pollster, I can tell you it is accurate that polls are indeed polls, but I would also go a little bit further, and when you put a bunch of polls together, you get what we call is a trend, and I would say the trend for Joe Biden is not good. You saw the recent Fox News poll. We also had bad news for the economy there. The Wall Street Journal poll, same thing. I mean, every single poll, actually, I don't know of a single poll right now that has shown good news on the economy for the president, and I would say it's less Bidenomics and more Bidenflation.
Yeah, it's one thing when you have polls. It's another thing when you have a pattern. Meantime, Hillary Clinton is now warning about a third-party candidate. NBC News reporting the following. She said, quote, "It's pretty effing concerning," said a person familiar with the White House discussion about the matter. Clinton pressed Biden to take the third-party threat seriously and come up with a way to compensate for it, one of the sources said. What do you make of that, Kaylee?
Yeah, well, if there's one thing that Hillary Clinton knows well, it's how to lose an election to a guy that everyone had already written off. So maybe this advice actually should be taken seriously by the Biden White House at this point. But it is true that a third-party candidacy threatens Biden more than Trump. Trump is shoring up his support among the GOP primary voter base. Biden is quickly losing his footing among his own party. A recent poll from the Washington Post found that 59% of Democratic primary voters want another option. That is a large percentage of his own voters who want something else. So a third party, it definitely hurts him more.
It's a big number. It really is. Lastly, the Fox Business poll, 2024 Republican primary without Trump in the race, I thought was interesting here, Dustin. Nikki Haley leading. Your final thoughts on this? I got about 15 seconds for you to wrap us up.
Well, looking forward to the Fox Business debate. We are going to be seeing Nikki Haley coming in with a surge from the last debate for sure. Ron DeSantis, really, he needs to get some juice from this, and I think that's really going to be the dynamic in the poll in the debate.
Yeah, Dustin, Kaylee, thank you both.
And welcome back, and thank you to Trace and Kaylee for an interesting segment there. I'm curious what you thought of the debate. I can't believe it's been less than a week. I will say that it was, and we'll talk about it here in a moment in our recap on Fox 5 DC. It was unwatchable. It was crazy. I actually had a lot of hope for it. One thing that I think Republicans in particular have wanted for quite some time, if you remember back in 2012, you had George Stephanopoulos, who is a former press secretary for a Democrat president. He's a Democrat himself, and he was the moderator for, I think it was, whatever debate it was in 2012. And he's asking questions that had nothing to do with anything the Republican primary voter would have cared to talk about. And that's what the debate was. And I had a lot of hope with the Fox Business debate that we would have with Dana Perino, a former press secretary for a Republican president who does understand what Republicans care about and understands their positions. And ultimately, it didn't seem like she was the lead moderator, though she did kind of try to take over, which I thought was actually good because it was chaos on stage and quite remarkable to watch. But ultimately, based on our surveys, and we're not backing any candidate at this point, but it's very obvious that 58 to 60% of the Republican Party, Republican primary electorate is backing one candidate, and they're actually pretty big leads at this point. But we're going to go to again Crystal Knight and Jeanette Reyes at Fox 5 DC for the morning show, and we'll be talking about the debate.
Fox 5 at 7 a.m. starts right now.
Honestly, every time I hear you, I feel a little bit dumber for what you say.
I think we would be better served as a Republican Party if we're not sitting here hurling personal insults.
Joe Biden should not be on the picket line. He should be on the southern border, working to close our southern border.
We can't be successful as a country if people aren't even safe to live in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Bidenomics has failed. Wages are not keeping up with inflation.
7 Republican presidential hopefuls gathered at Ronald Reagan's Presidential Library in California last night for the second primary debate. We want to bring in Democratic strategist Crystal Knight and Republican strategist Dustin Olson to talk about this. We talked Monday. I think we dabbled a little bit into this as well. So post-debate, just generally, before we get into the specifics and the candidates, I know a lot of people described it as unwatchable, lacking substance, entertaining. What are your thoughts? I'll start with you, Crystal.
Well, I don't think there was a clear winner. I think last night was more of the same, more rhetoric about what each candidate would do. We also saw candidates attacking each other on a deeper level, and also attacking Donald Trump much more than they did in the first round. And so it was very, uneventful in my opinion.
Attacking Donald Trump more directly, looking right into the camera, speaking to him. What did you think, Dustin?
I like the unwatchable. I thought that Fox did a great job, and I thought that generally the moderators did a great job. Most people had a better performance than previously, but I would say that Donald Trump won the debate.
It thus far has felt like this is a race to make it a race, with Donald Trump leading by as many as 40 points in a lot of polls. Was that accomplished for anyone, would you say? At least, did anyone get close to being that second place?
I'm not sure. Last night, I'm not sure one particular candidate stood out. I thought Nikki Haley did have a great performance. She was the one to watch. I also stated, earlier in the week that Ron DeSantis had more to prove, and I don't think that he improved his performance over this second debate.
Really? You don't think he did better than the first time? Although it was a lower bar, according to a lot of people. Yeah.
Marginally.
Okay. How about you, Dustin?
I think that DeSantis did do better, but mostly in the second half, so people may have tuned out by then. And I thought that Nikki Haley did great in the first half. The second half, not so much. The clip that you just played, I think, is actually really damaging for her, because you never want to tell people that you're getting dumber. And it was so dismissive of Vivek Ramaswamy, who is a very good communicator. I thought it was a big mistake.
I want to talk about Vivek, because in the first debate, a lot of people kind of described him as combative and a know-it-all, and it seemed, at least initially, like he was trying to tone that down a little bit. In the end, it was a little questionable as to whether he stuck to that. What do you think compared to his first performance?
Well, he obviously learned a few things, and he learned coming out and attacking everybody like carte blanche. That didn't work, and he tried to turn it around. But I would say that he ultimately won, partly just on timing. He got to have the last word. At the very end, he was able to kind of make the case for America first, and time was up, and he got to have the last word. So,
speaking of attacks, Donald Trump, or Donald Duck, was really trending, along with Donald Trump on Twitter, but Donald Duck specifically, Chris Christie, calling Donald Trump that. A lot of people were saying writer's strike clearly affecting the debate, because it seemed like they were also trying to make these one-off jokes and things like that. Is that ever effective?
It didn't land, quite honestly. And I think that's why you see so many people, talking about the Donald Duck comment, because those kinds of jokes, those kinds of attacks, while they're great in the moment, but it didn't even last beyond, the fodder of what you're trying to accomplish, which is really to complain about Donald Trump not showing up at the actual debate. I thought Chris Christie did have a stronger performance than the first round, but his jokes, his attacks, they were mid.
Yeah, I can almost picture their consultants and their team saying, say this line at about this point. So the question really is, Donald Trump, him missing this second debate, is he going to pay for it? Thus far, it doesn't seem he's paid a political price. What do you think?
It's brilliant. We did a poll right before the first debate, and 59% of Republicans wanted him to debate. Yet, I think most people who are watching this see after the first debate, he further consolidated support. And then I think after this, he's going to further consolidate support as well.
Now, do you wonder, though, for the third debate, as the pool gets smaller and smaller, that maybe he has more of a reason to show up with the candidates kind of dwindling?
I think as the pool gets smaller, there's absolutely an argument for him to come. But one of the things that his campaign has stated is that he's so far ahead of all of these candidates. Why give them any momentum? Why give them the opportunity to attack him? It weakens his position running for re-election, but he's stronger when he's away, unfortunately.
Okay. What are you looking for in these next, we got 40 days till the next debate. What are you looking for between now and then, Dustin?
I would expect that somebody's going to fall by the wayside. And honestly, we should have had fewer people in the debate last night, in my opinion, because ultimately Republicans would like to see less than 6 people on the stage, and about 40% of them would like to see 3 or less.
Okay. All right. Hopefully we can have you all back on for that third debate as well. And who knows what will be trending then. My goodness. I never would have imagined Donald Duck would be. All right. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know if you agree with our points on that, but it was quite remarkable for a debate. And just interesting. I went to look at one of our previous surveys, and this is in New Hampshire. I just pulled up the favorability ratings of Chris Christie. First of all, that was the most groan-worthy lines, the Donald Duck thing. And by the way, it's not the first time someone gave that same joke. That was a Hillary Clinton joke from years ago, and she honestly did a better job delivering it. But there's a reason why these numbers are the way they are. This is New Hampshire Republicans, and we tested on favorability. There's Chris Christie, if you can see that. I have it highlighted. We have the very unfavorable and somewhat unfavorable for Republicans. Republican primary voters in New Hampshire, which is the state where he thinks he's the strongest and where he's going to, defeat everybody else. Very unfavorable impression of Chris Christie, 38.8%. Somewhat unfavorable impression of Chris Christie, 24.3%. You put that together, that's 63.1% unfavorable impression of Republican primary voters in that state. And for the general election, it's 60.6% unfavorable. And that'll make it very difficult for him to make it anywhere, because unlike other candidates who might have somewhat high unfavorables, the favorables for him, only 8.4% have a very favorable impression of Chris Christie. Anyway, that's just something you can learn from that. Curious what people think about the debate in general. I did think that comment was very dismissive of Vivek Ramaswamy, and I don't think it bought anything for Nikki Haley and ultimately diminished her, and it was really quite ill-conceived on her part. It's okay to have really pointed comments at somebody, but that didn't really further any kind of agenda, in my opinion. And it's interesting, what she was talking about before that was on TikTok, and I would say that by far, I agree with her more than anybody. She's the only one who really, I think, got the importance of how TikTok can impact this country. She didn't quite go all the way on it. I do think that it's a tool that can have a really negative impact on young people and determining what they think about, and we see all the Tide Challenge, all those kinds of things, Tide Pod Challenge. Anyway, it's a terrible app, and she's the only one who's really fighting on it. But Anyway, I thought that was interesting. Next, we're going to go to NewsNation. If you haven't checked out NewsNation, it is worth checking out. They're a new one, new cable station on the market in the last couple of years. They brought people from the various other cable networks, and they're really attempting to be down the middle, straightforward news station. So highly recommend them. But I was on Morning in America very early on Friday morning to talk about the impending shutdown that didn't happen. And I made a comment on that I didn't realize was a prediction about Democrats being desperate for a shutdown. Of course, over the weekend, we saw why, but I'll talk about that when we come back. But this is Morning in America, and I'm speaking with Marky Martin.
Now I want to get to this. Tensions are reaching a boiling point in the House as lawmakers face a late Saturday night deadline to avoid a government shutdown. House Republicans remain divided. Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Congressman Matt Gaetz getting into a really tense exchange in a closed-door meeting yesterday after Gaetz accused McCarthy of funding a negative social media campaign against him, which the House Speaker denies. This as the Washington Post reports that some McCarthy critics in the House GOP are plotting an attempt to remove him as early as next week. Let's bring in Republican strategist Dustin Olson and Democratic strategist Tim Hogan. Thank you both for hopping on this morning. Happy Friday. Dustin, let me start with you. This is a lot of in-party fighting and drama for House Republicans with the government shutdown looming this weekend. This exchange apparently got testy behind closed doors. I know this isn't the first time these men have sparred, but is that a far-fetched allegation by Gaetz against McCarthy?
Well, first of all, I think this is just what happens when you have such a razor-thin majority. And as far as these influencer campaigns, this is actually something fairly new, it seems, in politics. We had recent reports about the George Soros-funded TikTok army for Biden. I think this is actually a problem in politics to have this out in social media where it's not actually disclosed who's paying people to say things on social media, if this is actually true. But ultimately, we saw 17 rounds of votes earlier this year, and ultimately I think it was good for the party because we were able to work things out. And I think ultimately in the long run, McCarthy's going to stay, Gaetz is going to get what he gets out of this, and ultimately the country will be fine.
Yeah, and this, of course, coming at the same time that he's threatening to oust the speaker if he doesn't meet certain spending demands. Tim, let me pivot to you. What's the overall impact of this ongoing feud that we see between McCarthy and Gaetz? And now even reports that McCarthy's speakership could be in jeopardy if he doesn't meet those demands by some of these hardline Republicans.
I think Dustin's right that there's a razor-thin majority. You have 222 Republicans in the House. 5 to 10 of them are constantly looking to either vote down legislation to keep the government open or to potentially move to vacate Kevin McCarthy. And that's overall bad for everybody. We have the Senate moving on legislation that would keep the government open, that would make sure that our troops get paid, that would make sure that food security, national security are funded. But when you have such a small margin and when you have Kevin McCarthy focusing every day on keeping his speakership and only able to plan one day at a time to try to stay alive, this is what happens. And you have so much leverage with such a small faction. Representative Don Beyer, a Republican from Nebraska, made a point that it is time for Republicans to negotiate with Democrats on this because there is simply no other way out of it. Kevin McCarthy made a deal with the White House that he is reneging on. And, you know, I think the reality is we're going to see a government shutdown, but it is because there is such chaos in the Republican caucus and Kevin McCarthy has no control over them.
Yeah. And you know, Dustin, I want to get your take on what Tim just said. What's the likelihood that McCarthy will have to turn to Democrats, you know, to get some sort of deal passed and to strike something to avoid this late Saturday night?
Well, I think that would be great if that was actually true, but I think Democrats are actually desperate for a shutdown. And we started this week off with the ABC News Washington Post poll that showed President Biden trailing Donald Trump by 10 points. I think with all the economic news and a lot of other polls that have shown that really voters are are really giving Biden credit for a bad economy, that ultimately they would like to be able to shift the narrative. And I don't think you're going to actually have Democrats really willing to avoid a shutdown, because they would like to hang this around Republicans' neck.
Yeah. Tim, I'll get your response to that. And also, speaking of Democrats coming to the table, everybody, kind of making some concessions here. McCarthy has made repeated calls this week for President Biden to come to the bargaining table, strike a deal, to meet somewhere in the middle, especially on border policies, certain spending cuts. Many Democrats have said President Biden should not agree to negotiate with McCarthy. But in your eyes, should he?
The negotiation right now is in the House Republican caucus. Kevin McCarthy can't pass anything with the members of that caucus. I think he's going to be forced to the table to do a more reasonable agreement, probably the agreement that he already signed off on, the top line spending with the White House. And he's making it sound like he needs another negotiation. He's just going back on his word. And I just want to say on that ABC Washington Post poll, even those publishers recognize that that is a huge outlier. And when you look at the fall of a reelect for a president like George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, they were all presiding over an economy that was recovering. Yes, they were struggling in the polls, but they all ended up winning re-election. And Democrats are not rooting for this. Republicans, so many Republicans are not even rooting for this. You have Mitch McConnell, Shelley Moore Capito, senators begging McCarthy to fix the problem in his caucus. This lies with Kevin McCarthy. And the problem is he has no control. That's the issue.
Yeah, we'll see what comes to fruition here. I know Matt Gaetz said if the leadership moves a Democrat spending bill to advance Democrat priorities, and there very likely will be a motion to vacate that speaker, and he's going to face that. So I know he's under intense pressure, too, to try to make everybody happy. Dustin Olson, Tim Hogan, thanks so much for your time on your Friday mornings.
Thank you.
And thank you to Marky and Tim. That was interesting interchange, and both have interesting thoughts. I'm curious what you think. It is interesting that, as I said there, that I really do think that Democrats were desperate for a shutdown because of the economic news, and Tim did his best to try to pivot away from that. But the fact is that while the Washington Post poll is an outlier to some extent, there are a number of surveys that are moving in that direction, from the Wall Street Journal to Fox News to NewsNation's own survey. And what we talked about earlier with Trace Gallagher, all the different economic indicators, and all the different questions people have been asked on the economy. Real Americans are feeling the rising prices, and it's become baked into their public opinion on the economy. And it actually is a problem for President Biden and for Democrats. And it's why, at the end of the day, you saw a congressman over the weekend. I'm shocked that somebody actually did something this ridiculous, but in order to stop the vote to keep the government open, the congressman pulled the fire alarm and now says he thought that was how he's going to open up the door. But that just shows how crazy things have gotten. And to Kevin McCarthy's credit, he tried many different ways to keep it going. Now, that being said, it's also very clear that the American people are generally, as I said in one of the interviews, very much are against how things generally work in Washington, D.C. And even though there had been some progress, it hadn't been enough in a lot of people's opinions. So we'll see. I can't wait to be in the field to ask people questions. And you, by the way, can help us decide what questions we ask. If you go to pollingclub.com, you can sign up to be part of the polling club. You can help us determine what questions we're going to ask, what topics we're going to dive into when we take the pulse of the American people next. So please go and sign up for that. Or if you'd like to commission a survey, you can do that as well by going to americanpulse.us. Follow me on X at Dustin Olson, or just tune in for the next time we do the Polling Club podcast. We're doing that now weekly, the Polling Club taking the American pulse, and look forward to having you be a part of that next time. But feel free to drop us a line and tell us what you think. With that, have a great day.